The plan had never been fireworks, drones, or curated petals in the shape of initials. It had been simpler, quieter, the kind of moment that lives in the pulse and the breath, and the way the ocean braids itself into moonlight. And for months that was enough to steady the hands reaching for the ring hidden in the sock drawer back home. The last-minute ticket deals looked like fate disguised as an email, and in a blur of screenshots and itineraries, it became Thanksgiving in Hawaii. A surprise for both families and a promise to make the most of being 21 and already 6 years into a story. In the airport shuttle, she leaned her head on the window, watching Palm's silhouette against a molten sky, and said, "Remember when we were 15 and you told me you'd propose somewhere warm?" And laughed in the way that said, "This is our script, don't lose your place." Dinner the first night was a postcard come alive, teal water dimming to ink, a torch flaming and fidgeting with the wind, the soft glissando of a singer covering an old soul standard near the bar. The ring carved an outline in the pocket, a gravity well tugging the mind. Every time the hand moved, the world stuttered and reassembled around its secret weight. She ordered a citrusy cocktail she'd spotted on a stranger's story last week, neon flecks and sugared rim, and he tried to mirror the name, felt his tongue trip on the menu's flourish, and pointed. When the wrong drink landed with a cheerful clack, something fragile in her expression wilted. "It's not a big deal," he said, voice steady the way people hold a wobbling tray, eyes flicking to the pocket universe at his hip. "It is when I said what I wanted," she answered, not harsh but clipped, as if syllables were coupons cut just a bit too close to the dotted line. The singer shifted into a song they'd kissed to in a senior-year parking lot, and he thought maybe that was a sign. Maybe the small annoyances were preamble to a better scene. But by the hotel door, she drifted 2 steps ahead, keys jangling like punctuation that refuses to end a sentence. He waited. Morning came bright as a sales pitch, and they parasailed, which meant he left the ring in the safe, which meant every gust seemed to ask, "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" And every wave below looked like torn paper glued into a scrapbook sky. By evening, a cloudbank chewed the sunset to gristle. The beach shifted into the cool of metallic blues and grays, and the hush that makes the heart believe it's the only one making noise for miles. "Walk?" he asked, and she nodded, arms folded against a breeze that wasn't really cold but wasn't what she wanted either. They walked where the foam gloved their ankles and retreated in half-hearted apologies, the hotel's warm lanterns making small islands of gold along the path. He slowed, the heart tilted into a gallop. He felt the words queue up like planes waiting to land, the ones he'd rehearsed in the shower, in the car, under headphones on the train, the ones that made sense of all the ways the world had split and reknit around the two of them. The knee bent, an old choreography, the body remembering clay before the mind approved the sculpture. And then her hand lifted, palm outward, a stop sign from someone who loves you enough to hope breaks work in sand. "I hope you're not proposing right now," she said, and her voice wasn't cruel, it was firm, the firmness of a list taped on a mirror and read each morning until it becomes prayer. "This isn't what I wanted." The words landed with the gentle thud of a suitcase set on a spare bed in a dark room. He straightened, swallowed air that suddenly didn't seem like a shared resource, and felt the ring's shape burn through fabric, an outline of what could be mistaken for courage or for foolishness depending on who held it up to the light. "Okay," he said, voice thin enough that wind could see through it, and they walked back to the hotel with the world newly misaligned, the way pictures skew after a minor earthquake. Silence strapped itself in for the night. In the morning she said, "I didn't reject you. I rejected you know how," and there was a small shrug that tried to be a bridge and failed to reach the other bank. "Do it again," she added, brightening as if flipping on a ring light. "The right way." He nodded in that polite social way people nod to avoid dropping everything they're balancing, then let the day carry them through activities that looked normal from the outside and tasted like paper from the inside. When they got home, the apartment smelled faintly of the basil that had died in their absence. The plant's brittle leaves a chorus of small, dry applause for anyone who could keep something fragile alive on a windowsill. She left the bag by the door and opened a water bottle with a twist that sounded like a neck cracking. He stared at a paused game, controller warm from being held and not used. "We're going to talk about this, right?" he asked, voice even, not yet willing to borrow the heat of the argument to come. "About what?" she said too quickly, the kind of deflection that hopes to catch a dart between two fingers. "Don't do that," he said, setting the controller down like a small animal he didn't quite trust to stay where it was put. The conversation unfolded like a poorly designed map, streets that doubled back, cul-de-sacs that promised exits and offered only hedges, the legend smudged by a greasy thumb. He said, "You rejected my proposal," and she said, "No, I rejected the moment," and they batted the words like shuttlecocks that refused to fall and end the point. He said, "Hawaii wasn't memorable enough," and she said, "Memorable isn't the same as meaningful," and both of them were right in ways that couldn't find a common unit for conversion. "You didn't listen," she said, and the sentence had the satisfied click of a lock sliding into place. "I've been listening for 6 years," he answered, and his own lock clicked in another door, in another hallway, in another house built on the same lot of hurt. She said dramatic, he said Instagram, she said standards, he said effort, and none of those words placed gently on the table turned into the other's missing piece. The door closed behind her with a slam that tried too hard to be definitive. He slept on the couch and woke to a back that had aged a decade overnight, the ceiling a blank card waiting for a message he didn't want. The kitchen filled with the smell of bacon and eggs, domesticity sizzling as if breakfast could solder a broken seam. Instead, the scent merely wrapped the hurt in a prettier ribbon. "Are you going to eat?" she asked without turning around, the pan popping like bad reception. "I'm not hungry," he said, and locked himself in the bathroom, where steam wrote brief encouraging letters on the mirror and then erased them. By afternoon, he took the long way around the block, past a chalk drawing that yesterday had been a dragon but now was rain softened into a bright bruise on the sidewalk. The note on the counter when he returned, "At my parents' if you want to talk like an adult," had a pleasant curve to the handwriting that didn't match the stiffness of the sentence, the way a smile drawn on a cartoon doesn't make noise. He crumpled it, tossed, missed the bin, left it where it fell, a paper flower in the wrong vase. The next days became a collage of counsel. A close friend at lunch set down a burger, grease haloed like a minor miracle, and said, "Don't redo it on command. You're not a performer paid in engagement," and the conviction felt kind and a little theatrical. Game night chatter hushed when he told the story. Someone said, "Man, a trip like that already says something," and another added, "If the setting matters more than the person, what's the setting set for?" And for a moment he floated in the buoyancy of their certainty. A mutual friend at the store paused between avocados, considering ripeness and relationships like they were cousins, and said, "I get wanting a special scene, but I also get that asking for a second take like it's a reshoot hurts," and he nodded as if she'd named not just a feeling but its species and genus. He heard himself say, "She made me feel like an idiot," and the word hung there, a rusty bell that had rung too long. That evening, at home, the doorway framed her like an accusation wearing casual clothes. "Talking about me again?" she said, arms crossed, and sarcasm slid off the sentence like a grin drawn with a blade. "You humiliated me," he said, and it was truth to him and a mischaracterization to her, and a word that turned the room into a courtroom. No jurors, only two lawyers paid in history. "I expect you to be an adult," she said. "Like you, looping your parents in," he shot back, and both of them knew they'd invited audiences into a play that already had too much applause. Keys, door, night air. A ritual of cooling down he walked for miles, passing windows where other people's dinners glowed like small hearths in an older world. They tried again the next day, began sentences with, "Let's get everything out," and listened with the kind of quiet that's really just waiting for one's turn to speak. "It felt like the end of the world," he said, and she said, "It wasn't about good enough," and an invisible stenographer took it all down without annotations for tone. "Standards," she said, "effort," he said, "respect," both said, and none of the words came with the valves to release their pressure. That night, opposite ends of the couch, a TV show's laughter track tried to teach the room how to laugh again and failed. The small ring box in his pocket felt like a heartbeat that wasn't syncing with his. "If we can't agree on this," he said, voice a low hallway, "how do we agree on marriage?" And she flinched as if he'd tossed the future like a plate. "So that's it?" she asked, trembling not from fear but from the effort of keeping the body from shaking more. In the morning, coffee as olive branch, steam lifting like a white flag, she said, "I don't want to fight," and he said, "Neither do I." And both meant it the way people mean they don't want rain on a day forecasted for storms. "It's about respect," he said, finally, the word landing between them like a shared bowl of fruit, not enough to fill anyone, enough to acknowledge hunger. She looked away, not to avoid him but to avoid the mirror his face had become. A few days later, she packed gently, as if the air between objects could bruise, and left for her parents. "You're ending 6 years over this?" she asked, not rhetorical, not disbelieving, just tired. "Not over this," he said, "over what it showed me." And this time the door closed without dramatics. The apartment returned to its original quiet, a quiet that felt like a lake at dawn, still, echoing, mercilessly honest about what breaks the surface and what sinks. At night he held the ring to the lamp, watching the stone catch light and send it back in fragments, and thought, it was never about the ring. It was about the choreography, the camera angle, the applause. No, that was unkind. It was about wanting to feel seen the exact way the heart imagined it. He wondered if love was sometimes two good people with different definitions of memorable, and whether affection could survive translation without losing its verbs. Sleep came late, not as mercy but as a bureaucrat stamping forms. Morning came early, the basil finally thrown away, the windows opened, the world carrying on with or without their scene. The apartment learned their new choreography, faster than either of them did. Drawers became quieter, doors considerate, footsteps edited themselves to ellipses. Even the refrigerator hummed like a librarian who approved of order but not joy. Boundaries, someone had told him once, are just fences with gates that only the owner can open. Now, standing at the sink with the ring box in his pocket and the basil-cleaned pot drying like a retired helmet, he wondered whether he knew which gate led to mercy and which to pride. He made a list, because lists offered the promise of sequence. 1. No late-night postmortems. 2. No reproposal on demand. 3. Limited contact until words feel like bridges, not weapons. 4. Ask for support that isn't applause. The words looked reasonable on paper, like rules for a safe neighborhood watch, but each one tugged a hidden wire in his chest, a small alarm that went off whenever the phone buzzed or the keys turned in the lock across town where she was staying. His mother called, not to pry, she said, which meant to pry gently. "I saw your pictures," she told him, and he waited for the question. It arrived with the care of someone carrying soup. "You looked handsome," he laughed, and it sounded like it had scraped its knee. "Thank you. You don't owe me details," she added, "but if I can say one thing, wanting something a certain way isn't a sin, but asking someone to perform their love isn't a sacrament either." He held the phone to his cheek and let the words rest there. They didn't fix anything, but they put a cool cloth on it. He went for long walks he pretended were errands. The market on the corner piled oranges into a pyramid that dared gravity to blink. The florist's window wore a wreath of eucalyptus that smelled like the idea of a fresh start. On a bench near a soccer field, he opened a book he'd bought on impulse, because the title promised healing and the first chapter promised patience, and both felt like foreign languages spoken slowly so tourists could nod. The book said, "Set limits, mute where needed, step away from rehearsals of old scenes." He underlined, then circled, then closed the cover and watched a kid miss a goal and grin anyway. When friends asked him out for coffee, he chose places with large windows and small tables. "Tell it from the middle," Mara said, stirring a drink the color of late afternoon. "Skip the beginning. We all know beginnings are charming liars. What did it feel like the second after?" He thought of sand refusing to hold his weight. "Like the world tipped 6 degrees and never came back." Mara nodded as if that were a temperature she knew. "What do you want now?" He almost said, "to be right." He almost said, to be loved better than a storyboard. He said, to stop imagining alternate proposals every time I pass a restaurant with string lights. Make a ritual, she said. Not a shrine, those are for grief that worships itself. A ritual to mark the ending so it doesn't keep pretending it's still happening. He lit a candle that night for 10 minutes, the wax pooling like a small, honest failure, and he said out loud to the plantless window, I loved you as I knew how. And then he blew the candle out before the words could calcify into a habit. The next day, he met her at a park by mutual agreement, daylight and public benches like bumpers in a bowling lane. She arrived in a sweater he'd once picked out, which felt like a trick and a kindness. Thank you for meeting me, she said, hands tucked into her sleeves as if she were trying to protect her knuckles from what the air might do to them. I won't take long. The bench was cold through his jeans. A dog chased a pigeon and apologized by sitting. I miss you, she said, and the simplicity almost undid him. I miss you too. They didn't reach for each other. Their restraint was a new muscle and it trembled, but it held. I've been telling my parents it's a misunderstanding, she continued, and he watched the word choose its seat like a picky theater-goer. We wanted different frames. He let the metaphor sit. Frames fall, he said softly. Pictures sometimes survive. She bit her lip the way she did when syllables felt like steep stairs. I don't want this to be how we end. He thought of his list, which had felt wise in the kitchen, and now felt like a child's drawing of a complicated machine. I can't redo it, he said, not because I won't make effort, but because I can't perform through a bruise. She winced, not offended but struck by recognition. I didn't mean to bruise. Intentions don't stop gravity. They both looked away, then back, as if checking if the other was still the same person or already a stranger wearing a familiar jawline. What if we wait, she suggested. Let the pressure bleed out. He imagined a valve hissing. He imagined both of them turning the handle and getting tired and walking away before it was safe. Waiting is a decision, he said. I don't want waiting to be the way we love. She nodded, and the nod broke him a little because it was gracious, and that felt like a goodbye more than any slammed door. Okay. It was the softest surrender he'd ever heard. He went home and took the ring out, not to wear, not to photograph, just to hold its cool certainty in his palm. He turned the stone until it scattered a small constellation across his wall. You're not a failure, he said, surprising himself by addressing the object. Then he realized he hadn't been talking to the ring at all. He put it back in the box, then the box back on the highest shelf of the closet, a place for things kept not out of shame, but out of respect for the harm their nearness can cause. Work was a mercy. Spreadsheets that asked for numbers, not narratives, meetings in which success was a chart and not a kiss. At lunch, colleagues swapped sitcom recs and soup recipes. He became an expert at smiling with the eyes while the mouth worried over the taste of memory. When his manager asked, "You good?" the question sat on his desk like a paperweight. "Getting there," he said, and meant it in the way climbers mean it when they tell base camp the weather is clearing, while clouds still argue with the peak. On Thursday, his father texted a photo of his parents' hands from years ago, wrinkled knuckles and a ring that looked ordinary and therefore miraculous. The caption, not all yesies were pretty, but they were ours. He stared at the image until it became a topographical map, lines as rivers, veins as roads, a ring as a small city with lights on in every window. He didn't cry because the body can only schedule so many meetings with salt in a week, but something inside him stood up and stretched and cracked its back. He unfollowed 3 proposal accounts and muted her stories. The action felt petty, and then it felt like hygiene. He wrote an email to a therapist he'd been meaning to contact since a cousin's wedding 2 summers ago, when he'd realized love made him both brave and theatrical. In the intake form, under "What brings you here?" he wrote, "A disagreement about a proposal revealed a disagreement about respect, and I don't know how to carry both without dropping myself." He hit send and imagined the message swimming through wires like a swimmer who isn't fast but is stubborn. Friday night, his friends came over with ingredients. They cooked like a small, joyous orchestra, garlic section in fortissimo, pasta in legato, sauce in a respectable allegro. When he told the story again, he did it without the parts where he plays the martyr or edits her into a villain, and the room felt safer for the honesty. "Maybe she wanted to be seen," Sam said, spoon tapping the pot rim like a metronome. "Maybe you wanted to be believed." "Isn't that the same thing?" he asked. "Sometimes," Mara said, "and sometimes they're neighbors who don't speak." That night alone, he wrote a letter he didn't send. It began with the difficult truth, the beach, the hand, the sentence. And then it took a turn the way streets do in old cities, suddenly, into a courtyard with a fountain he didn't know was there. "I wish I could have given you the exact sunset in your head," he wrote. "I wish you could have seen the moonlight as enough because it was me holding it up to you." He ended with no demands, just, "Thank you for the years. I'm going to learn how to make a moment without fearing its audience." He placed the letter in a drawer meant for warranties and instruction manuals, a strangely fitting archive for things that explain how to keep and how to fix. On Sunday, he returned the ring, not to the store but to the jeweler for resizing, a symbolic gesture the clerk didn't need to understand. "For whom?" she asked, standard intake question. He answered, "For future hands." He walked out lighter, not because the metal had changed, but because he'd given himself permission to imagine a future in which the yes was a conversation, not a production. Passing the florist, he bought eucalyptus and rosemary, filled a jar, and set it on the sill where basil had once failed. The apartment smelled like kitchens in houses he'd never lived in but could now imagine, the leaves catching sun like small green sails. That evening he sat at the table with a blank page and wrote 3 sentences to himself, a new list without numbers. "Be kind to your own trying. Let some doors stay shut. Build a yes that can breathe." They weren't commandments so much as soft agreements, and reading them felt like tying his own shoes before stepping out. He didn't know what part 3 of his life would look like, but for the first time since Moonlight had translated into No, he wasn't afraid of drafting it without a director. The first quiet that didn't hurt arrived on a Tuesday, mid-morning. While the kettle argued itself toward a boil and light sifted through the eucalyptus like patience made visible. It wasn't dramatic, no revelation, no cinematic swell, just the recognition that his chest had room again, that breath could land and unpack its suitcase without asking for permission from old scenes. The therapy intake had turned into an appointment. The appointment had turned into a room where everything could be named without being punished. Naming, the therapist had said, is how we give boundaries a voice. Naming is how the body stops bracing for the next wave and starts noticing its own shoreline. They talked about the proposal night, but more than that, they mapped the habits surrounding it. The urge to edit himself into a version she'd applaud. The reflex to solve discomfort with performance. The way saying no to redoing the proposal felt like self-respect dressed as refusal. Scene and sequel, the therapist called it, event, then processing, action, then meaning. He'd lived too long in scenes that demanded applause. It was time to give sequels their due. He brought to therapy the unsent letter. Read it aloud. Stumbled, then steadied. "Good," the therapist said, not grading, simply witnessing. "Now write one to the version of you who knelt under the moon." He tried that evening and discovered a tenderness he hadn't extended to himself in months. "Dear boy who knelt," he wrote, "you were trying to turn love into a clear path with your one good knee on the ground. You didn't fail. The path just refused to be paved by that gesture. Stand up, keep walking." The words didn't fix the past, but they stopped it from repeatedly tripping him. By Saturday, he recognized he could go to the beach without inventorying proposals on the sand. He still chose the river instead, water that moved but didn't sell postcards. He sat on a bench where geese negotiated territory like petty diplomats, and opened the book that had once sounded like a slow foreign language. Now the chapter about boundaries read like a manual he could assemble without cursing at the screws. He underlined, "Choose actions that align with values, not with someone's expectations of spectacle." He felt the sentence settle into bone. Her text arrived like a leaf landing, soft, inevitable. "Can we talk? No urgency, no demand, no choreography." He stared at the screen until the river's surface made his reflection wobble. He typed, yes, daylight, neutral ground. He chose the conservatory at the public gardens because glass and green make truths less afraid. She was already there when he arrived, standing by the ferns, palms tucked into the sleeves of a denim jacket. The plants behind her looked prehistoric, as if they remembered weather older than their argument. "You look well," she said, and he tried the compliment on. It fit loosely but didn't itch. "You too." They walked the paths where small plaques named things simply: fiddlehead, maidenhair, peace lily. He thought of naming as mercy. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she began, not rushing. "Not because I changed my mind about wanting what I wanted, but because I made you feel like trying wasn't enough. I didn't respect the quiet way you love." He swallowed. Gratitude and grief jostled, trying to pass through the same door. "Thank you," he said. "I'm sorry, too, for turning it into a courtroom and asking to win instead of asking to understand." They stopped near a shallow pond where koi moved like commas in a sentence that would never need a period. "I realized something," she said, voice careful. "I wanted a proposal to fix what no proposal can fix, my fear that love won't be witnessed. I wanted the frame to prove the picture was real." He nodded. "I wanted simplicity to prove that the picture didn't need a frame. Maybe both are valid, maybe not together." A couple pushed a stroller past. The baby looked up at the cathedral of glass and waved at light as if it were a person. "I'm not here to ask for another try," she added, reading the air. "I think we did the brave thing already and told the truth about what we need." He breathed, and the breath didn't snag. "I think so, too." They stood there, the absence of anger as notable as the presence of the plants. "I wrote you a letter I never sent," he said, surprising himself. "I did, too," she answered. "Maybe that's our best language now, letters written, lessons kept." They smiled, small and genuine, the way people smile at a shared, retired inside joke. They parted at the entrance, no vow to stay friends, no melodrama. Just two people who had once planned forever and now made a very small, very honest plan. To walk toward separate doors with the same respect they'd been learning to give themselves. Outside, the city's sounds resumed. A bus sighed, someone laughed too loud on a phone, a dog named after a spice refused to go the direction its owner chose. Life, insisting. He returned to the apartment and rearranged the furniture, not out of superstition, but to see the room without the old pathways. He moved the couch 3 feet to the left and discovered the window's light found a new angle on the rug at 4 in the afternoon, turning the fibers into something briefly expensive. He cooked for one without the sadness of cooking for one. He salted with the care of a person learning to taste instead of season for other people's palates. He put on a record and let the trumpet fill the corners, not to drown silence, but to share space with it. In therapy the next week, he told the story of the conservatory, and the therapist smiled the way someone smiles when a student solves a problem by noticing what was already on the page. "You closed the loop," she said. "Scene, sequel, choice." He left with homework: plan a day that looks like the love you want to practice, not for a partner, for the person who will have to live with you the longest, yourself. He made a day. Morning at the community pool, where old men argued amiably about the best stroke and teenagers tried to be invisible and failed. The water made everything equally buoyant. He swam laps not to beat a clock, but to feel the body translate breath into motion. After, he sat in the bleachers and wrote a page. "I want a love that doesn't mind being off camera. I want a yes that is 2 hands building a table, not a trailer for a movie we can't afford to make again and again." He underlined building. At the bookstore, he wandered the essay shelves and found a slim volume about everyday rituals, the kind that keeps a person stitched to their own life without needing knots. He read about lighting a candle at dusk and naming 3 kindnesses. He read about placing a chair near a window and dedicating 20 minutes a day to looking outside without naming anything. He bought the book and 2 postcards of paintings with ordinary light. He didn't text her a photo. He didn't text anyone. He put the cards on the fridge like windows he could walk toward whenever he forgot his apartment had sky. The mutual friend he'd met by the avocados invited him to a small gathering. No game night, no group analysis, just dinner and a film projected on a sheet in a backyard that smelled like tomatoes pretending to be sweet. He went. He laughed when something was funny, not too loudly to prove wellness, and quieted when a scene pressed the room into attention. The film's final shot was just two people washing dishes, one passing the plate, one drying, a choreography so ordinary it made the throat ache. He realized he could cry at that and not at sunsets. Progress, of a kind the heart recognizes before the mind gives it a name. On Sunday, he took the ring, still resized but unassigned, and walked to the river again. He sat under a sycamore that let pieces of sky through like mercy and opened the box. The stone caught noon and spun it into a small star. He didn't throw it, this wasn't that story. He didn't pawn it, this wasn't that lesson. He held it and said, "One day, if there is a day, this won't be proof, it'll be punctuation." He closed the box and put it away with a calm that felt earned, not narrated. Weeks later, he met someone at a community garden class where everyone killed at least one seedling and nobody pretended otherwise. She wore dirt under her nails like a credential and laughed at the way he planted basil with too much hope. They shared a trowel and the names of their favorite soups. When the class ended, they traded cuttings with the shy bravado of people who know how to move carefully in someone else's space. He didn't think of proposals. He thought of roots. He thought of water measured, not poured to impress. He thought of beginnings that didn't have to announce themselves with brass. If he ever told the story of the beach again, he decided he'd tell it without villains or saints, just two people with different frames trying to love a picture that kept changing. He'd say the night walk mattered because it revealed what our yesies needed to breathe. He'd say, "I'm learning the choreography of a smaller stage and I think it suits me." He'd say, "There's a eucalyptus on my sill that reminds me forgiveness has a scent, and it's sharper than I expected and cleaner." At dusk, he lit a candle, named 3 kindnesses, the way the pool water held him without instruction. The text from his father that didn't ask for updates, only sent a photo of the sky over their porch, the basil trying again in the jar beside the eucalyptus, small and audacious. He blew out the candle and didn't make a wish. He made a decision. Keep building a yes that can breathe, one ordinary chore, one sincere conversation, one unperformed laugh at a time. The room held the smoke like a signature. Then the air cleared, and everything smelled faintly of green.